Psalm 26. I'm going to open in prayer, but let's get to our Bibles here. So there's not many of us, so we're going to take extra long tonight. Just kidding. All right. Psalm 26. Let's open in prayer, and then we're going to just take a brief look at the psalm. We'll take some prayer requests, and then we'll spend some time in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for all that you've done for us. Thank you for working in our lives. I pray that you would help us to live for you. Help us to be encouraging to one another. Help us to be prompting one another to be living for you, to be serving you, to be looking to you. I pray that you would be with us this evening, that we would learn from your word. That we would, as we look specifically at thankfulness and different things about it, that you would help us to apply it to our lives. I pray that you would be with those who are not here tonight for whatever reasons they may be, whether traveling or health or other reasons. So we pray that you would be with them, that you would encourage them, edify them, protect them. Thank you for all that you've done. In Jesus' name, amen. Good evening. All right, so we're in Psalm 26, and this is also, I believe, our devotional for today as well, for the 31 days of thanks, so, or at least the reading. It comes out of that. So if you look in there, you will find Psalm 26 as one of the readings for one of the days. But let's go ahead and read through it. If I don't have the pages turned on me. Let's go ahead and read through Psalm 26, and then we'll just kind of make some observations about it. So a Psalm of David. Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have walked in my integrity, and I have trusted in the Lord without wavering. Examine me, O Lord, and try me. Test my heart and my mind and my heart. For your loving kindness is before my eyes, and I have walked in your truth. I do not sit with deceitful men, nor will I go with pretenders. I hate the assembly of evildoers. And I will not sit with the wicked. I shall wash my hands in innocence, and I will go about your altar, O Lord, that I may proclaim with the voice of thanksgiving and declare all your wonders. O Lord, I love your habitation of your house, and the place where your glory dwells. Do not take my soul away along with sinners, nor my life with men of bloodshed, in whose hands is a wicked scheme, and whose right hand is full of bribes. But as for me, I shall walk in my integrity. Redeem me and be gracious to me. My foot stands on a level place. In the congregations I shall bless the Lord. So here we are. We're looking at the psalm. David is coming before the Lord. He is claiming his integrity. So verse 1, vindicate me, or judge me to be right, or judge what I am like. Find me to be pure. And why is he saying this? For I have walked in my integrity. I have trusted in the Lord without wavering. Think about what David had been through in his life. He has been through a lot. And what's one of the things that we notice about David in his life? He had faith in God. Remember when he came to defeat Goliath when he was just a young man, and Saul questions whether this is a good idea or not, and David says, I've killed a lion and a bear, and who will deliver this Philistine into his hand? God will, right? And when he comes to Goliath, David does not say, I will do this in my own strength. He understands that God is the one who enables him to be able to defeat Goliath. So that's not the surrounding circumstances for Psalm 26, but we see that is just an example of David living a life unwavering of faith, right? Were there times that he doubted or questioned God? Yes. But the general direction of his life was that of one that had faith and trust in God. But then look at what he does this. So he comes before God. He says, vindicate me, judge me, for I have walked in my integrity, uprightness, integrity, the idea of it's consistent. It is what it is. There's no question about what he is like. But then what does he say in verse 2? Examine me, O Lord, and try me, test my mind and my heart. This is interesting. So he is claiming integrity, but then he is more than willing to let God examine him in what's going on. The idea of the words here are actually that of a smelter refining metal. So think about how do they purify gold? Does anyone know? They do. They melt it down, and it melts, and what happens is all of the impurities kind of bubble up to the top. It's called slag, and they take the slag off, and it purifies it. And this is the idea of examine me and try me, test my mind and my heart. So examine me, checking for impurities, checking for things that are not right. And David is asking God to do this. And test my mind and my heart. So the idea of, it's interesting, Rotherham says, test my reins and my heart. Well, why reins? Well, this is kind of your motivations. What makes you tick? Why you do the things that you do. Have you ever had this happen to you where you do something for someone else, and you would like to say that you were doing it out of the goodness of your heart? Like, I'm just a generous or gracious person. And then whether you don't get the recognition that you were expecting, or something happens where maybe they don't appreciate what you did for them as much, and you say, well, fine, whatever. And, so what were your motivations behind it, right? Sometimes we do things and we have a stated motivation, but then sometimes what our driving motivations are not all that good.
You can only collect your jewels once. It's either here on earth or in heaven.
Yep. And kind of makes us think about 1 Corinthians, right? The early part of 1 Corinthians. What we do, it's not just what we do, but the motives behind what we do. Mm-hmm. So David is here talking to God, asking God to examine him, try him, test my mind and our heart, for your loving kindness is before my eyes, and I have walked in your truth. The loving kindness here is the chesed. It's covenant love, God's faithfulness, his great. It's one word that takes a lot of different words to describe. It's a word that I'm still trying to work on getting to the bottom of. But think about God's faithfulness to the nation of Israel, despite their unfaithfulness to him, right? Despite their constant betrayal of him. I've been listening to the Bible audio, and I was listening in Jeremiah today, and talking about the immorality of both the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom, Judah, and their constant betrayal in idolatry, and God likens it to the sin of adultery, right? There's betrayal, and it's interesting. He says Israel's bad. Judah is treacherous because they were supposed to be. They saw what Israel did. They saw how Israel received punishment for what they did, and yet they still committed adultery against me, in adultery with trees and rocks. Really vivid picture of them following after false gods, but they're just trees and rocks. Yeah, it's an idol that's been shaped, but ultimately it's just a tree or a rock. And it makes you think about that, and you go, wow. But And God still loved them and was still faithful to them despite their idolatry. But here David is seeing his loving kindness. If we look at the life of David, do we see God's covenantal love? When David was just a boy, when Saul was still king, Saul had heirs to the throne, and David was promised to be the one that was going to be the king. And he had Saul trying to get rid of him. He had all sorts of different things, and even in civil war, all those different things going on. And yet God's faithfulness to David continued and persisted. And so David is looking back as he's writing this psalm, looking back at God's previous faithfulness. Is that something that we're to do in our own lives, where we see God's faithfulness as well? Yeah, I would say so. We should look back at our own lives, see how God is faithful or has been faithful. But now we see in verse 4, I do not sit with deceitful men, nor will I go with pretenders. I hate the assembly of evildoers, and I will not sit with the wicked. Does this sound like any other psalm at all? Psalm 1, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. So David is saying, I have not associated, I am not following in the same, I don't have the same value system, I'm not making the same decisions as those who reject God. I hate the assembly of the evildoers, those who congregate together to figure out how they can do more evil, those who are planning and conniving against God. Verse 6, I will wash my hands in innocence, and I will go about your altar, O Lord. All right? So all up to this point, he's been saying all these things. I've been walking in integrity. I want you to examine me, make sure everything is where it should be, and I have not been living in the same lifestyle as those who hate you. I am not using the same value system as they are. I am not associating with them when it comes to my close relationships either. But why? Verse 7, that I may proclaim with a voice of thanksgiving and declare all your wonders. Verse 7 of Psalm 26. So David is doing all these things so that he has the opportunity to proclaim with a voice of thanksgiving and declare all your wonders. David understood that in order to be able to give thanks to God, things had to be right between him and God, right? We kind of talked about this a while ago, and it's kind of in the forefront of my mind because I had those speaking critiques that I had to do. Thankfulness is recognizing what God has done or what someone has done and responding in a way that brings credit to them. So thankfulness has to be directed towards a person, okay? You can't just be thankful and it kind of flit off into nowhere. Thankfulness is directed towards someone, right? If we are thankful to God, how well are we to be, how easy is it for us to be thankful to God when we're not even in fellowship with him because of sin? Does that seem like could be an easy thing to do? Probably not. Also, think about what is sin. Is sin along the lines of idolatry? Where God says this, but I chose to do this. At that point, whatever this was, it was more important than what God said, right? Well, then, how thankful am I for what God said if I'm doing something else, right? So do you think unthankfulness or ingratitude is actually a reflection of our relationship with God. It can be a symptom, or it can be a part of the problem. Some of the other reading, we're in Joshua right now on Sunday evenings, right? And one of the concerns that Joshua had as they came into the land, and that Moses had prior to that in Deuteronomy, as you start to come into the land, one of the things he was concerned about was that as they got comfortable in the land, as the nation of Israel started to get comfortable, as they were that they would start to develop an attitude of ingratitude, that they would forget what God had done for them. There's more here in this psalm. It continues on. He does not want to be associated with the wicked. He does not want to be taken with the wicked, but he wants, but as for me, verse 11, but as for me, I shall walk in my integrity, redeem me and be gracious to me. My foot stands on a level place in the congregation. I shall bless the Lord. David understands that a right standing with God and thankfulness go together. And that in order to be thankful to God and to declare his wonders requires a right relationship with him. And this is a really good time of year. Thanksgiving is actually my favorite holiday. It's the least commercialized as part of it. That's part of the reason why it's my favorite holiday. Second reason, I like to think of Thanksgiving as a reminder and thinking about Christmas and Easter at the same time. Thanksgiving, I really, really like Thanksgiving. But guess what? I struggle with being thankful sometimes. And it's often a reflection on how well I've been doing walking with God in my uprightness, faithfully, and integrity. And when we're walking with God, when we have a right relationship with him, it's interesting, my foot stands on a level place. There's no tripping hazards. There's no unevenness in verse 12. Okay? It's interesting. So David is understanding the privilege of giving thanks to God. It's a command, yes, we are to give thanks to God. But Psalm 100, I don't remember which verse right now, I think it's verse 4. Come before him with thanksgiving, enter his courts with praise. It's a command, we are to do this. But it's also a privilege that we as believers have, right? If we have a relationship with God, we know who to be thankful to. And that affects who we are thankful to, right? We have a world that understands thankfulness is important, but it's not directed towards the one that we're supposed to be thankful to. So as we creep up on forget creeping, it's just we're sprinting towards it at this point. As we move quickly towards Thanksgiving, we should be thankful all the time. We should be characterized by thankfulness. It should be a part of us. But especially during this time of year, it gives us a time to try to pause and think about the things that God has done for us and why we are to be thankful. So, keeping that in mind, let's look for ways to be thankful. We don't have to look far in all reality. And thankfulness, the other part of thankfulness is that it is public. We not only thank God in private, but we thank God in front of others as well. All right. Keeping that in mind, any prayer requests or praises?